The most dangerous discovery of Nietzsche was not nihilism or the death of God. It was about how people who see the raw truth of reality are systematically destroyed by a society that fears such vision. Nietzsche documented how individuals capable of seeing through collective illusions, comforting lies, and convenient truths that sustain civilization are inevitably marginalized, silenced, or forced to withdraw. He called these individuals free spirits, people who perceive the arbitrary nature of morality, the falsity of absolute values, and the fundamental inherent meaninglessness that underlies human existence. Nietzsche considered this vision not only rare but dangerous, because those who possess it often end up isolated, misunderstood, and unable to communicate what they see without causing shock or hostility. Today, I will show Nietzsche's most disturbing discovery about people who see beyond the veil of conventional values, and why he believed this capacity for vision either destroys them completely or transforms them into something extraordinary, something beyond human. The case that revealed Nietzsche's most dangerous discovery began during his own life. The son of a Lutheran pastor, Nietzsche grew up immersed in the Christian morality he would later destroy in his works. Already in adolescence, he began to experience what he would later call suspicion, the growing sensation that the fundamental values of his society, especially religious ones, were based not on eternal truths but on human psychological needs. This initial suspicion transformed into a disturbing clarity during his years as a professor at the University of Basel, when he began to see through not just religion, but the entire value structure of Western civilization. Nietzsche wrote, "I am dynamite. My truth is terrible, for until now lies have been called truth." He began to see that the moral pillars of society, goodness, altruism, compassion, equality, modesty, were not divine or absolute truths, but psychological constructions serving specific purposes, often to weaken the strong and elevate the weak, to level human excellence in the name of collective mediocrity. This vision isolated him. He could no longer participate in the basic social consensus. He could no longer engage in trivial conversations that accepted such values as given. He could no longer teach in an educational system that perpetuated these illusions. In 1879, he resigned from his university position and began a decade of solitude, writing books that would revolutionize philosophical thought, but which at the time were largely ignored or condemned. His withdrawal was not a choice, it was psychological necessity. As he himself said, "To live alone one must be an animal or a god. I am neither. At this moment, I am a solitary philosopher." Nietzsche realized he was not dealing with a personal pathology, but with an inevitable condition for anyone who begins to see through the necessary illusions of civilization. He was observing what happens when someone realizes that there are no moral facts, only moral interpretations of facts. Such a person can no longer participate in the collective consensus that sustains society. In Beyond Good and Evil, he wrote about this painful clarity. "He who fights with monsters should be careful lest he thereby become a monster. And if you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you." This was not poetic rhetoric. It was a precise psychological observation about the cost of seeing beyond the comfortable illusions that most people accept as reality. But Nietzsche discovered something even more disturbing. Individuals who develop this vision don't merely isolate themselves, they become targets. Society instinctively tries to silence or discredit those who threaten its fundamental illusions. In Human All Too Human, he wrote, "In the real world, the exceptional man is persecuted by all." Here, hatred of the superior spirit appears as if ordered by the deepest laws of species preservation. Nietzsche understood this was not mere intolerance, but a collective defense mechanism. Society needs its illusions to function. It needs its faith in absolute values, in transcendental purposes, in objective moral orders. Anyone who threatens these beliefs becomes, by definition, an enemy of collective well-being. Modern research validates Nietzsche's observations. Jonathan Haidt's studies on moral foundations show that approximately 95% of people operate within given moral systems, accepting their culture's rules and values without deep questioning. Only about 5% develop what Haidt calls post-conventional moral reflection, the ability to examine their own moral foundations from outside. This minority experiences exactly what Nietzsche described, the disturbing sensation of seeing others operating within value systems that seem arbitrary or unfounded when viewed from a broader perspective. Nietzsche identified this as the perspective beyond good and evil, the ability to see morality not as transcendental truth, but as a psychological and social tool. People with this ability don't merely see through superficial moral conventions, they perceive how these systems serve deeper power dynamics, how they express specific wills to power, and how they are often rooted in the resentment of the weak against the strong. Nietzsche wrote, "The independent mind knows that good is not a fact but an evaluation, specifically the evaluation of those who benefit from certain actions or who at least want such actions to be done for their benefit." But Nietzsche discovered the true danger was not in the vision itself, but in society's reaction to it. People who can see beyond collective illusions become targets of what he called the herd instinct, the collective impulse to punish anyone who threatens consensus. In The Gay Science, he observed, "The free spirit is viewed with suspicion, often with fear and almost always with aversion. When he speaks, the herd moves away." Nietzsche understood this pattern was not coincidence, but an essential function of how societies maintain cohesion. The free spirit is instinctively perceived as an existential threat, not because they are wrong, but because they are seeing too much. Nietzsche documented this pattern repeatedly in his works. The bearer of new perceptions is called mad, immoral, dangerous. When Nietzsche declared that God is dead, he wasn't simply making an atheistic statement. He was observing that the transcendental foundations of Western values had collapsed, and society had not yet confronted the full implications of this collapse. This perception was met with horror and ridicule. When he suggested that Christian morality was a slave morality, designed to limit the naturally strong and level human excellence, he was denounced as immoral and anti-human. When he questioned the values of compassion and altruism, arguing they often masked resentment and will to power of the weak, he was accused of advocating cruelty and selfishness. Nietzsche realized this was not mere intellectual disagreement, but a deep psychological defense. In Genealogy of Morals, he wrote, "Everything that elevates the individual above the herd and intimidates the neighbor is called evil, and the fair, modest, submissive, equalitarian mentality, with mediocrity of desires, acquires moral value and honor. Society labels as evil any perception that threatens its fundamental consensus, not because these perceptions are false, but precisely because they might be true, and this truth is unbearable for the collective psychology." This creates what Nietzsche called the philosopher's solitude, the inevitable psychological isolation of anyone who sees beyond consensus. He wrote, "Every profound spirit needs a mask. Even more, around every profound spirit a mask is continuously growing, thanks to the constantly false, that is, shallow interpretation of every word, every step, every sign of life he gives. The thinker who sees beyond conventional values must learn to hide their perceptions, to speak in codes, to use social masks, or face continuous rejection and marginalization." But Nietzsche's most disturbing discovery was yet to come. As he observed how this vision beyond conventional values manifested in different individuals, he identified three distinct paths for those who begin to see through collective illusions, each representing a different response to the painful clarity of perceiving the absence of transcendental foundations. The passive nihilist. Nietzsche documented how some individuals, upon realizing that moral values have no transcendental foundation, simply collapse psychologically. They conclude that if there are no absolute truths, then nothing matters. If morality is just a human construction, then there's no reason to act one way or another. These individuals experience what Nietzsche called passive nihilism, the feeling that, in the absence of absolute values, life loses all meaning and purpose. He wrote, "What does nihilism mean? That the highest values devaluate themselves. The aim is lacking. The answer to why is missing." The passive nihilist reacts to the death of God, to the collapse of the transcendental foundations of values, with despair and paralysis. Without a divinely ordained purpose, without objective distinctions between good and evil, they lose the will to act, to create, to live fully. In The Will to Power, Nietzsche described this condition, nihilism. The goal is missing, the answer to why is missing. What does nihilism mean? That the highest values devaluate themselves. This individual sees through society's illusions, but lacks the strength to create new values in their place. The active nihilist. The second type Nietzsche identified is the active nihilist. Someone who, upon perceiving the absence of transcendental foundations for values, reacts not with paralysis, but with destruction. These individuals conclude that if values are mere human constructions without objective foundation, then they must be actively destroyed to liberate humanity from its illusions. Nietzsche wrote, Active nihilism can be a sign of strength. The power of the spirit may have grown so much that its previous goals, convictions, articles of faith, have become inadequate. The active nihilist doesn't merely see through conventional values. They actively seek to destroy them, often without anything to put in their place. Nietzsche saw this response as potentially powerful, but ultimately incomplete. In his view, the mere destruction of existing values without creating new, stronger ones only deepens the vacuum of meaning that the collapse of the old values created. He observed, to destroy for destruction's sake would be contrary to life. After all, one destroys so that something exists, so that something new can exist. The Overman, Übermensch. The third and rarest type is what Nietzsche called the Übermensch or Overman, someone who sees through collective illusions, but instead of succumbing to despair or dedicating themselves to mere destruction, develops the strength to create new values. This individual doesn't just recognize that values are human constructions without transcendental foundation. They embrace this fact as an opportunity for creating higher, more life-affirming values. Nietzsche wrote, "Man is something that shall be overcome. What have you done to overcome him? All beings so far have created something beyond themselves, and you want to be the ebb of this great flood and even go back to the beasts, rather than overcome man." The Overman represents the most powerful response to the vision beyond conventional values. They not only see the truth, they have enough strength to bear it and transform it into a new form of life affirmation. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche wrote, "I teach you the Overman. Man is something that shall be overcome. What have you done to overcome him? The Overman is the meaning of the earth." Understanding your specific type is crucial, because each requires different approaches to what Nietzsche called the challenge of nihilism. But first, one needs to understand why Nietzsche considered this discovery so dangerous. As he observed the devastating effects of the vision beyond conventional values in his contemporaries and himself, he concluded that seeing the truth without developing the strength to bear it represented real dangers for both individual well-being and society. Nietzsche identified 3 specific dangers that made this discovery so threatening. Danger 1. The paralysis of meaning. Nietzsche wrote, "Nihilism as a psychological condition arises, firstly, when we have sought a meaning in everything that happens, a meaning which isn't there. When someone discovers that society's fundamental values have no transcendental basis, that they are psychological and social constructions, they face a crisis of meaning that can be paralyzing." Nietzsche observed that without the ability to create new values, the individual might fall into apathy, depression, or despair. He wrote, "I fear that animals view man as a being like themselves who has lost in a most dangerous way its animal common sense. They view him as the insane animal, the laughing animal, the weeping animal, the miserable animal." Danger 2. The collapse of social structures. The second danger Nietzsche identified is that a clear vision of the arbitrary nature of conventional values threatens the very structures that sustain civilization. He realized that society functions because most people accept certain values as given, as unquestionable truths. When these values are revealed as mere constructions, social cohesion is threatened. Nietzsche wrote, "We fear that the complete understanding of the origin of morality would alienate us from morality." He realized that civilization depends on a certain level of innocence, of non-critical acceptance of conventional values. Those who see beyond this innocence become potentially destabilizing forces. Danger 3. The temptation of directionless power. The third and most dangerous aspect is what Nietzsche called the will to power, without the direction of life-affirming values. He realized that when someone sees beyond conventional values, they also free themselves from conventional moral constraints. Without the ability to create new, life-affirming values, this freedom can lead to the exercise of power without direction, to cruelty for cruelty's sake, to destruction for destruction's sake. In Beyond Good and Evil, he warned, "He who fights with monsters should be careful lest he thereby become a monster. And if you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you." Nietzsche saw this danger not as hypothetical, but as a real risk for individuals who see beyond collective illusions without developing the strength to create new values in their place. This is why Nietzsche considered the revaluation of all values not just philosophically important, but psychologically urgent. As the vision beyond conventional values represented such dangers, He developed what he called the philosophy of the hammer, a systematic approach to destroying old values and creating new, more life-affirming ones. Phase 1. The Great Suspicion. Nietzsche taught that the first step in dealing with the vision beyond conventional values is to develop what he called the Great Suspicion, the ability to question not just specific values, but the very foundations of valuation. He wrote, "Suspicion, the evil eye for everything that is revered, is the characteristic of all higher philosophy. This suspicion isn't mere skepticism or rebelliousness. It's a deep investigation into the psychological and historical origins of values. In Genealogy of Morals, he demonstrated this method, tracing how values like good and evil evolved over time, revealing their roots in power dynamics and resentment, rather than eternal truths. Technique. Nietzsche instructed his readers to practice what he called suspicious psychology, examining values not just for their explicit content, but for who benefits from them, what instincts they express, and what kind of life they promote or repress. He wrote, "The question is not who is right, but for which type of human being is reason on their side." Phase 2. The Inversion of Values. The second stage Nietzsche identified as the inversion of values, the ability to see how many conventional values represent the opposite of what they claim. He argued that Christian values like humility, compassion, and altruism often masked resentment, desire for control, and will to power of the weak over the strong. In The Antichrist, he wrote, "What is good? Everything that heightens the feeling of power, the will to power, power itself in man. What is bad? Everything that stems from weakness." This inversion wasn't merely destructive, it was an attempt to prepare the ground for a new valuation based on life affirmation, rather than the life denial he saw in Christian morality. Phase 3. The creation of new values. The final and most crucial phase is what Nietzsche called the revaluation of all values, the creation of new life-affirming values that go beyond conventional distinctions of good and evil. He wrote, "The greatness of man lies in being a bridge and not a goal. What can be loved in man is that he is an overture and a going under." Nietzsche saw this creation of values not as an intellectual exercise, but as a psychological necessity for those who see beyond collective illusions. Without this creation, vision leads only to nihilism, either to the paralysis of passive nihilism or to the directionless destruction of active nihilism. For Nietzsche, this creation of values wasn't arbitrary. He believed new values should be judged by a single criterion, whether they affirm life, enhance the will to power, and promote human excellence. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he wrote, "I beseech you, my brothers, remain faithful to the earth and do not believe those who speak to you of otherworldly hopes. They are poisoners whether they know it or not." As Nietzsche understood that the vision beyond conventional values would either destroy or transform individuals, he studied historical figures to understand the difference between destruction and transformation. The case of Socrates, partial vision. Nietzsche was deeply influenced by Socrates, but saw in him an example of incomplete vision. In The Birth of Tragedy, he argued that Socrates represented the triumph of rationality over instinct, of logic over myth. Socrates saw through many illusions of his society, challenging conventional values and Athenian authority figures. But, in Nietzsche's view, Socrates substituted one illusion for another. He exchanged traditional myths for the myth of absolute reason, of objective truth. Nietzsche wrote, "Socrates wanted to die. Not Athens, he gave himself the poison cup. He forced Athens to give him the poison cup." Socrates saw partially beyond his society's values, but not completely beyond the need for transcendental values. The case of Jesus interrupted transformation. Nietzsche had a complex view of Jesus, seeing him as someone who began a genuine revolution of values, but whose message was distorted by his followers, especially Paul. In The Antichrist, he wrote, "In reality, there was only one Christian, and he died on the cross." Nietzsche saw Jesus as a kind of free spirit who lived beyond the moral conventions of his society, practicing what he preached. But the church that developed after his death, Nietzsche argued, betrayed this revolution, transforming Jesus's living practice into a dogmatic system of beliefs, into a morality of resentment and life denial. The case of Goethe, successful transformation. For Nietzsche, Goethe represented one of the rare cases of someone who managed to see beyond collective illusions and transform this vision into creativity, rather than destruction or despair. In Twilight of the Idols, he wrote, "Goethe, not a German event but a European one, a grand attempt to overcome the 18th century through a return to nature, through an ascent to the naturalness of the Renaissance, a kind of self-overcoming on the part of that century." Goethe, in Nietzsche's view, not only saw through the conventions of his time, but had enough strength to create new values, new forms of expression, without falling into nihilism. He embodied what Nietzsche would later call the Dionysian spirit, the ability to embrace the chaos and suffering of existence and transform them into artistic creation. Nietzsche's transformation journey. Most significantly, Nietzsche documented his own struggle with the vision beyond conventional values. The son of a pastor, he grew up immersed in the Christian morality he would later criticize so severely. His psychological collapse in 1889, when he embraced a horse being whipped in the streets of Turin and then fell into a psychosis from which he never recovered, has been interpreted in various ways. Some see in it the manifestation of the dangers he himself identified, the unbearable tension of seeing beyond collective illusions without managing to complete the revaluation of all values. But before this collapse, Nietzsche had articulated with extraordinary clarity both the dangers and the possibilities of the vision beyond conventional values. He wrote, "I had to overcome even having overcome. Living means always separating oneself from what one was." Nietzsche's journey demonstrated both the risks and rewards of seeing beyond collective illusions, the loneliness, the misunderstanding, but also the possibility of extraordinary freedom and creativity. As individuals with vision beyond conventional values often face isolation, Nietzsche emphasized the crucial importance of finding what he called friends at a distance, other free spirits capable of sharing perspectives without the limitations of conventional values. In Human All Too Human, he wrote, "It is a privilege to have many friends, but it is not for everyone. We can easily imagine a very independent and superior man who, though well situated in life and perfectly developed mentally and physically, does not have a single friend." Nietzsche identified 3 essential types of relationships for the individual who sees beyond collective illusions. Type 1. The disciple. Nietzsche recognized that free spirits often attract followers who sense there is something beyond conventional values, but who haven't yet developed their own clear vision. He had an ambivalent relationship with this dynamic. On one hand, he saw the potential to help others develop their own independence. On the other, he feared disciples' tendency to transform insights into dogmas. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he wrote, "Now I bid you lose me and find yourselves, and only when you have all denied me will I return to you." Type 2. The fellow traveler. Nietzsche valued more the relationships between equals, other free spirits walking their own path but capable of recognizing and respecting each other's independence. In The Gay Science, he wrote about this kind of friendship. "In our relationship with men who are timid about their own inner nature, we must not start by being confidential. We should be like an open and spacious door for them. These relationships are rare," Nietzsche observed, "because they require individuals who seek neither validation nor domination, but simply the pleasure of independent minds meeting." Type 3. The valuable antagonist. Interestingly, Nietzsche also valued relationships with worthy enemies, intellectual opponents who honestly and forcefully defended conventional values. He wrote, "Our enemies reveal things to us that we might otherwise keep hidden from ourselves. Good it is to have enemies, and not all enemies are contemptible." Nietzsche saw in these antagonisms the opportunity to sharpen his perceptions, to test the strength of his new valuations against serious defenders of tradition. The recognition process. Nietzsche developed specific indicators for identifying other free spirits. 1. They question not just specific values, but the foundations of valuation. 2. They demonstrate what Nietzsche called love of fate, amor fati, the ability to affirm life with all its difficulties. 3. They avoid both dogmatism and empty relativism. 4. They demonstrate psychological, not just intellectual independence. 5. They show creativity in creating values, not just criticism of existing values. Nietzsche warned, "Beware of those who claim to be free spirits but are merely skeptics. The ability to doubt is not enough. The free spirit must also be able to affirm." Communication protocol. Nietzsche taught a careful process for communicating perceptions that go beyond conventional values. 1. Use social masks when necessary, not out of dishonesty, but out of strategic consideration. 2. Write for all and for none. Let your ideas find those ready for them. 3. Use metaphors and parables to communicate truths that resist direct expression. 4. Practice what Nietzsche called the pathos of distance, neither imposing your perceptions on others nor diluting them to make them more palatable. As the vision beyond conventional values, when integrated, serves both individual and social development, Nietzsche saw the revaluation of all values as essential, not just for personal well-being, but for humanity's evolution. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he wrote, "Man is something that shall be overcome. What have you done to overcome him?" He believed individuals who successfully integrate the vision beyond conventional values become what he called legislators of values, people who help humanity evolve beyond its current limitations. The three transformations. Nietzsche described the process of integrating the vision beyond conventional values as the three transformations of the spirit, a process of psychological evolution that moves the individual from non-critical acceptance of conventional values to the ability to create new values. Transformation, from camel to lion. The first transformation occurs when the individual, who has faithfully carried the weight of conventional values like a camel, transforms into a lion, a negative force that roars, "I will not," against imposed values. Nietzsche wrote, "The spirit becomes a lion to win freedom and be lord in its own desert." This is the phase of the great suspicion, of criticism, of rejection of imposed values. It is necessary but not sufficient, for the lion knows only how to deny, not to create. Transformation 2, from lion to child. The second and most difficult transformation occurs when the lion, having conquered freedom from non-critical acceptance, transforms into a child, a creative force capable of affirming new values. Nietzsche wrote, "Innocence is the child, and forgetting, a new beginning, a game, a self-rolling wheel, a first movement, a sacred yes." This is the phase of revaluation, of creating new values that affirm life. The child represents not infantilization, but the ability to create without the weight of tradition, without the need to justify values by reference to external authorities. Transformation 3. From human to overman. The final transformation involves what Nietzsche called becoming what one is, the complete realization of individual potentiality, not as conformity to an external ideal, but as expression of the individual's unique will to power. He wrote, "Becoming what one is presupposes that one has not the slightest idea what one is. This transformation goes beyond mere creation of values. It is the living embodiment of a new way of valuing, of a new relationship with existence. The individual doesn't just see beyond conventional values, they embody a new possibility for humanity. Cultivation is cultural medicine." Nietzsche believed individuals who successfully integrate the vision beyond conventional values perform a vital evolutionary function. They see possibilities for humanity that the majority, trapped in collective illusions, cannot see. In Beyond Good and Evil, he wrote about these philosophers of the future. They will be new friends of truth, truths that will be different from those all libraries have contained so far. These new philosophers, Nietzsche saw these individuals as physicians of culture, people capable of diagnosing the disease of nihilism he saw spreading throughout Western civilization and offering new possibilities of meaning after the death of God. He wrote, "Only as creators can we destroy," emphasizing that the true overcoming of nihilism comes not from mere criticism of old values, but from the creation of new, more life-affirming values. Specific pitfalls. As the path of integrating the vision beyond conventional values contains specific dangers, Nietzsche documented the most common ways individuals derail their own transformation process. Pitfall 1. Resentment. Nietzsche warned that those who see through collective illusions often develop resentment against the majority who remain blindly within them. This resentment ironically recreates exactly the slave morality that Nietzsche criticized in Christianity, a valuation based on reaction against others, rather than self-affirmation. He wrote, "I distrust all systematizers and avoid them. The will to a system is a lack of integrity." Pitfall 2. Complacent nihilism. The second pitfall Nietzsche identified is what we might call complacent nihilism, satisfaction with simply seeing through illusions, without the harder work of creating new values. In The Will to Power, he observed, "A nihilist is a man who judges that the world as it is ought not to be, and that the world as it ought to be does not exist. As a result, existing, acting, suffering, willing, feeling has no meaning. The pathos of in vain is the nihilist's pathos." The free spirit who remains only in the lion phase of negation, without progressing to the child phase of affirmation, falls into this trap. Pitfall 3. Return to the herd. The third pitfall is what Nietzsche called nostalgia for the herd, the temptation, faced with the difficulty of living without the certainties of conventional values, to regress to them, even knowing their arbitrariness. He wrote, "Love is the state where man sees things most different from what they are. The illusory force is at its peak here, as is the sweetening and transfiguring force. In love, one endures more than one would normally endure. One forgives everything. This love for the comfort of collective illusions, for the belonging they offer, can lead the free spirit to renounce their vision and return to the herd." Pitfall 4. Self-destruction. The final and most dangerous pitfall is what Nietzsche called the self-annihilation of morality, when the same intellectual honesty that allowed the individual to see beyond conventional values turns against itself, leading to a spiral of self-destruction. He observed, all great problems demand great love. Without this love for life, for existence itself, the vision beyond conventional values can lead only to self-dissolution, to the inability to value anything, including life itself. Maintaining integration. Nietzsche developed ongoing practices for maintaining a healthy relationship with the vision beyond conventional values. Periodic solitude to renew independence of thought. Artistic creation as expression of life-affirming values. What he called amor fati, love of fate, the ability to affirm life with all its difficulties, connection with other free spirits to prevent resentment, the cultivation of what he called the child spirit, the ongoing capacity to create new values. Nietzsche wrote, "The mature individual doesn't achieve perfection, but learns to dance even with his wounds." As Nietzsche understood the vision beyond conventional values in the context of broader cultural development, he saw individuals capable of such vision as performing an essential evolutionary function for humanity. In Beyond Good and Evil, he wrote, "The fate of the soul depends on whether we affirm suffering and responsibility to their ultimate consequences. In this extreme danger to the will, knowledge approaches man concerning the ambiguous character of existence and that everything he has denied up to now needs redemption through him." The historical pattern. Nietzsche observed that, throughout history, individuals with vision beyond conventional values often appeared in periods of cultural transition, when old values began to lose their force, but new values had not yet clearly emerged. He saw the late 19th century as one of these critical periods, marked by what he called the death of God, not just the decline of literal religious belief, but the collapse of the metaphysical foundations that sustained Western values. He wrote, "The greatest recent event, that God is dead, that belief in the Christian God has become unbelievable, is already beginning to cast its first shadows over Europe." Nietzsche saw this collapse as inevitable, as a result of the very will to truth that Christianity had cultivated, but which eventually turned against its own premises. He wrote, "Christianity as dogma perished by its own morality. In this way, Christianity as morality must also perish. We stand on the threshold of this event." In this context, he saw individuals with vision beyond conventional values as necessary precursors for the next phase of human cultural evolution, what he called the revaluation of all values, contemporary manifestations. If he could observe our era, Nietzsche would likely see even more intense manifestations of the value crisis he diagnosed. The collapse of transcendental meaning he predicted has progressed even further, resulting in what contemporary sociologists call post-traditional society, a context where individuals are increasingly left on their own to construct meaning systems, without the traditional structures of religion, community, or shared cultural narratives that once provided moral guidance. In this context, individuals with vision beyond conventional values may be sensing the growing cultural fragmentation and absence of shared narratives that give meaning to existence, the technological acceleration that outpaces human capacity to integrate changes into coherent value systems, the climate and ecological crisis that fundamentally questions the values of progress, growth, and consumption that have sustained industrial civilization, the new possibilities for the human condition opened by technology, which demand new ethical valuations beyond traditional categories. Nietzsche's crucial insight was that these crises cannot be resolved by simply returning to old values, nor by completely abandoning the need for valuation. They require what he called philosophers of the future, individuals capable not just of seeing beyond conventional values, but of creating new values equal to the challenges of their era. Creation without imposition. Nietzsche's crucial insight was that the vision beyond conventional values best serves human evolution when expressed through creation, not imposition. The goal is not to replace one dogmatic system with another, but to open possibilities for new modes of valuation. In The Gay Science, he wrote, "What is romanticism? Every knowledge that is not also joy for me is rejected by me." Nietzsche saw the creation of values not as establishing new absolute truths, but as generating new possibilities for life affirmation, the supreme integration. At the highest level of development, Nietzsche observed that individuals with vision beyond conventional values arrive at a paradoxical relationship with truth and values. They recognize the constructed, perspectivist nature of all values, including their own, and yet are able to affirm values with conviction without needing to ground them in metaphysical absolutes. Nietzsche called this amor fati, love of fate, the ability to affirm life exactly as it is with all its suffering and contradiction, without needing to justify it by reference to some ideal world beyond it. In Ecce Homo, Nietzsche articulated this supreme integration. My formula for greatness in a human being is amor fati, that one wants nothing to be different, not forward, not backward, not in all eternity, not merely bear what is necessary, still less conceal it, but love it. Nietzsche died in 1900 after a decade of insanity, without seeing the impact his ideas would have in the 20th century. His work would be misinterpreted and sometimes abused by totalitarian movements, despite his strong opposition to nationalisms, anti-Semitism, and herd thinking. But his vision of the condition of the individual who sees beyond conventional values remains one of the most insightful psychological analyses ever written. Nietzsche's most dangerous discovery was not that values are human constructions without transcendental foundation. It was that most people who see this truth never develop the strength to create new values equal to their vision. The danger lies not in the vision itself, but in failing to develop a creative relationship with the void that vision reveals. You are not a nihilist for seeing beyond conventional values. You are someone facing the challenge Nietzsche described over a century ago: how to live with authenticity and creativity in a world without transcendental foundations for values. Your vision is not a flaw in your psychological constitution. It is an advanced feature of the evolution of human consciousness. The question is not whether you should suppress your vision to fit into the collective consensus. The question is whether you will develop the strength to create life-affirming values equal to your vision. Nietzsche's philosophy offers a path from nihilistic paralysis to value creation, from directionless destruction to life affirmation, from an existential curse to an evolutionary opportunity. You were born to see beyond, not to suffer in silence, but to transform your vision into creation. The world needs your perspective, but needs it expressed as affirmation, not just as negation, as creation, not just as criticism. Your gift is not your burden. Your unconscious relationship with your gift is your burden. Learn to integrate it consciously, and you will become exactly what Nietzsche called a philosopher of the future, a creator of values for an evolving humanity. Nietzsche's most dangerous discovery was not that values are illusions. It was that most people who see this truth never learn to dance with it. The danger is not in seeing that the world has no inherent meaning. It's in failing to create meaning equal to the absence of meaning you perceive. You are not inadequate for this world. You are the precursor of a humanity yet to come. Once you learn to transform your vision into creation, your criticism into affirmation, your clarity into love for life exactly as it is, if you recognize yourself in Nietzsche's description of the individual who sees beyond conventional values, share in the comments how you deal with this challenge. Your journey of revaluation connects with others walking the same path. Subscribe for more insights on Nietzsche's discoveries about overcoming nihilism and creating life-affirming values. If you're ready to explore more of Nietzsche's perspectives on how to create life-affirming values after the death of God, check out my next video on The 3 Transformations of the Spirit, where I explore in depth the process by which Nietzsche believed individuals could overcome nihilism and become creators of values for a new era. Thank you for watching. See you in the next dimension.